Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, also known as Tarquin the Proud, from his cognomen Superbus, Latin for proud, arrogant, or lofty, was the seventh and last king of Rome. His reign is marked by political and social unrest. Tarquin ascended to the throne around 535 BCE and ruled until 509 BCE, reigning for 25 years until the popular uprising when he was overthrown. His reign is characterized by tyranny, lavish building projects, and military endeavors. The assault of Lucretia, a noblewoman, played a pivotal role in his downfall, leading to his exile and the establishment of the Roman Republic. This is Rome Revisited. Join us as we explore the ancient Roman Empire, from Romulus to Constantine XI. Lucius Tarquin belonged to the Etruscan Tarquini clan. He is traditionally considered the son of Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king of Rome. Although the exact chronology is unclear, Lucius Tarquin and his brother Arruns would marry the daughters of Servius Tullius, Rome's sixth king, who were known in history as Tullius Major and Tullius Minor respectively. In addition, one of Lucius' sisters would marry Marcus Junius Brutus and became the mother of Lucius Tarquin Junius Brutus, who would later become one of the founding members of the Roman Republic. We will discuss Brutus in more detail in a later video. Tullia Major was of mild disposition, yet her younger sister was of fiercer temperament and ambition, more suited to Lucius Tarquin and not that of her husband Arruns, who seemed to be more mild-mannered and content. Both out of her lust for and her loathing of her husband and older sister, Tullia would convince Lucius Tarquin to dispose of their spouses. Once their spouses were dead and out of the way, the conspirators were married. They had 3 sons, Titus, Arruns, and Sextus, and a daughter, Tarquinia, who married Octavius Mamilius, the Prince of Tusculum. Before long they began plotting to usurp the king, Servius Tullius, Tullia's own father, and seize the throne. They begin bribing senators and other men of importance. They spread propaganda denouncing Servius and his reforms, which had become popular with the people. Then, when Lucius Tarquin felt the time was right, he went to the Senate house with a group of armed men, sat on the throne, and summoned the senators to attend to him. He gave a speech to the senators denigrating Servius for many alleged crimes which we addressed in our video on King Servius Tullius. When Servius heard about what was happening, he raced over to the Senate house with as many armed men as he could find and confronted Lucius Tarquin. Lucius Tarquin then leveled the same accusations, this time directly to the king, and had Servius removed and thrown into the street. According to legend, it was at this time that Tullia raced the street in her chariot and trampled her father to death. By some accounts, she rode over his still body multiple times. The street where Tullia disgraced the dead king afterward became known as the Vicus Celeratus, the street of crime. Lucius Tarquin began his reign by ridding himself of Servian loyalists. This meant the deaths of several influential senators and other high-ranking members of the government. He made such decisions unilaterally, which began to cause fear and concern among the remaining senators and any others who began to question his rule. From early on, the signs of tyranny were present for all to see, although Lucius Tarquin would at times use conning to appear just. One such time was early in his reign when Lucius Tarquin called a meeting of the Latin leaders to discuss the bonds between Rome and the Latin towns. The meeting was held at a grove sacred to the goddess Ferentina. At the meeting, Turnus Herdonius inveighed against Lucius Tarquin's arrogance and warned his countrymen against trusting the Roman king. Lucius Tarquin then bribed Turnus's servant to store a large number of swords in his master's lodging. Lucius Tarquin called together the Latin leaders and accused Turnus of plotting his assassination. The Latin leaders accompanied Lucius Tarquin to Turnus's lodging, and thus, the swords then being discovered, the Latin's guilt was then speedily inferred. Turnus was condemned to be thrown into a pool of water in the grove with a wooden frame, or kratos, placed over his head, into which stones were thrown, drowning him. The meeting of the Latin chiefs then continued, and Lucius Tarquin persuaded them to renew their treaty with Rome, becoming her allies rather than her enemies. It was agreed that the soldiers of the Latins would attend at the grove on an appointed day, and form a united military force with the Roman army. Next, Tarquin instigated a war against the Volsci, taking the wealthy town of Susa Pomatia. He celebrated a triumph, and with the spoils of this conquest, he commenced the erection of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. He then engaged in a war with Gabii, one of the Latin cities that had rejected the treaty with Rome. Unable to take the city by force of arms, Tarquin resorted to another stratagem. His son Sextus, pretending to be ill-treated by his father, and covered with the bloody marks of stripes, fled to Gabii. The infatuated inhabitants entrusted him with the command of their troops. When he had obtained the unlimited confidence of the citizens, he sent a messenger to his father to inquire how he should deliver the city into his hands. The king, who was walking in his garden when the messenger arrived, made no reply but kept striking off the heads of the tallest poppies with his stick. Sextus took the hint, and put to death, or banished on false charges, all the leading men of Gabii, after which he had no difficulty in compelling the city to submit. Lucius Tarquin agreed upon peace with the Equi and renewed the treaty of peace between Rome and the Etruscans. According to the Fasti Triumphales, he won a victory over the Sabines and established Roman colonies in the towns of Signia and Circuitu. In Rome, Tarquin leveled the top of the Tarpeian rock, overlooking the Forum, and removed a number of ancient Sabine shrines to make way for the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, a project initiated by his predecessor, Tarquinius Priscus. He constructed tiers of seats in the Circus Maximus and ordered the excavation of Rome's great sewer, the Cloaca Maxima. According to one story, Lucius Tarquin was approached by the Cummian Sibyl, who offered him 9 books of prophecy at an exorbitant price. When he abruptly refused, the Sibyl proceeded to burn 3 of the 9. She then offered him the remaining books but at the same price. He hesitated but refused again. The Sibyl then burned 3 more books before offering him the 3 remaining books at the original price. At last, he accepted, thus finally obtaining the Sibylline books. In 509 BC, Lucius Tarquin began to feel the tide of the Roman populace turning against me. Tarquin decided he would embark on a campaign against the very wealthy nation of Rutul in hopes of attaining great spoils and assuaging the ire of his subjects. Failing to take their capital city of Ardea by storm, the king decided to take the city by siege instead. With little prospect of battle, the young noblemen in the king's army fell to drinking and boasting. When the subject turned to the virtue of their wives, Lucius Tarquinius Calatinus claimed to have the most dedicated of spouses. With his companions, they secretly visited each other's homes and discovered all of the wives enjoying themselves, except for Lucretia, the wife of Calatinus, who was engaged in domestic activities. Lucretia received the princes graciously. All the while her beauty and virtue kindled the flame of desire in Calatinus's cousin, Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son. After a few days, Sextus returned to Calatia, where he implored Lucretia to give herself to him. When she refused, he threatened that if she did not yield herself to him, he would kill her, and claimed that he had discovered her in the act of adultery with a slave, for which reason he had slain the unfaithful Lucretia, delivering the punishment as her husband's kinsman. To spare her husband the shame threatened by Sextus, Lucretia submitted to his desire. But when he had departed for the camp, Lucretia sent for her husband and father, revealing the whole matter, and accusing Sextus of assaulting her. Despite the pleas of her family, Lucretia's shame compelled her to stab herself to spare Calatinus from any suspicion that she had betrayed him. Her grieving husband, together with his father-in-law, Spurius Lucretius Tricipitinus, as well as his companions, Lucius Junius Brutus and Publius Valerius, swore an oath to expel the king and his family from Rome. Together they were able to rally the masses by recounting the various grievances of the people, the king's abuses of power, and by inflaming public sentiment over the assault of Lucretia. They were also able to revoke the king's imperium and send him into exile. Tullia fled the city in fear of the mob, while Sextus Tarquinius, his deed revealed, fled to Gabii where he hoped for the protection of the Roman garrison. However, his previous conduct there had made him many enemies and he was soon assassinated. In place of the king, the Roman Senate resolved to elect 2 consuls to hold power jointly. They would, as the first 2 consuls, Brutus and Collatinus, form what would be the new Roman Republic. When word of the uprising reached the king, Tarquin abandoned Ardea and sought support from his allies in Etruria. The cities of Veii and Tarquini sent contingents to join the king's army, and he prepared to march upon Rome. Meanwhile, Brutus prepared a force to meet the returning army. In a surprising reversal, Brutus demanded that his colleague Collatinus resign the consulship and go into exile because he bore the hated name of Tarquinius. Stunned by this betrayal, Collatinus complied, and his father-in-law was chosen to succeed him. Meanwhile, the king sent ambassadors to the Senate, ostensibly to request the return of his personal property, but in reality to subvert several of Rome's leading men. When this plot was discovered, those found guilty were put to death by the consuls. Brutus was forced to condemn his 2 sons Titus and Tiberius to death because they had taken part in the conspiracy. Leaving Lucretius in charge of the city, Brutus departed to meet the king on the field of battle. At the Battle of Silva Arcia, the Romans won a hard-fought victory over the king and his Etruscan allies, with each side sustaining painful losses. After this failure, Tarquin turned to Lars Porsena, the king of Clusium. Porsena's march on Rome and the valiant defense of the Romans achieved legendary status, giving rise to the story of Horatius at the bridge, and the bravery of Gaius Mucius Scaevola. Accounts vary as to whether Porsena finally entered Rome, or was thwarted, but modern scholarship suggests that he was able to occupy the city briefly before withdrawing. Ultimately, his efforts were of no avail to the exiled Roman king. Tarquin's final attempt to regain the Roman kingdom came in 499 or 496 BC, when he persuaded his son-in-law, Octavius Mamilius, dictator of Tusculum, to march on Rome at the head of a Latin army. The Roman army was led by the dictator Albus Postumius Albus and his master of the horse, Titus Aebutius Elva, while the elderly king and his last remaining son, Titus Tarquinius, accompanied by a force of Roman exiles, fought alongside the Latins. Once more the battle was hard fought and narrowly decided, with both sides suffering great losses. Mamilius was slain, the master of the horse grievously injured, and Titus Tarquinius barely escaped with his life. But in the end, the Latins abandoned the field, and Rome retained her independence. After the Latin defeat and the death of his son-in-law, Tarquin went to the court of Aristodemus at Cumae, where he died in 495. Lucius Tarquin's reign would be remembered as the catalyst for establishing the Roman Republic. His tyranny and self-servicing rule caused Romans to despise all things monarchy to the point of their hatred of being ruled by kings became state policy. This philosophy would dominate Roman politics for the next 500 years, climaxing with the assassination of the most famous Roman of them all. Lucius Tarquin was a strong and capable ruler, but his reign shows a pattern throughout human history that ruling only for oneself ultimately leads to one's self-destruction. His legacy lives on. So could your knowledge about such fascinating pieces of history? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more captivating content about ancient Rome. Dive into the past and keep the spirit of antiquity alive. This is Rome Revisited.